up in a middle-class family in Oklahoma to a conservative father who, side note, because I won't get into it later, was a member of the KKK in his later life, and allegedly, according to 3 Woody Guthrie songs, was directly involved in the 1911 lynching of Laura and L.D. Nelson, a fact which I assume probably caused Woody to create as much distance from his father as he did later on in his life. This does not align with his politics in any way, and I just felt like was worth mentioning. Woodrow Woody Guthrie had an extremely rough childhood, losing his family home to a fire in 1909 directly after it was built, a pattern which would start to form in Woody's life, as he would then later lose his sister when he was 7 from her self-immolating in anger during an argument with their mother, and later in 1927, his father was also severely burned in a house fire. But fire wasn't the only culprit to get licks in on Woody, as when he was 14, he and his siblings were left in the care of their eldest brother, Roy, because their mother, Nora, was hospitalized for Huntington's disease, causing severe dementia. Left on their own, Guthrie would take to the streets and beg for any money or food, or even just the pleasure of doing a small job to get some kind of pay. At this time, Guthrie also befriended a black shoe shiner named George after he saw him playing the harmonica on the street. He immediately went out and got his own, and the two began busking together, playing old passed-down blues folk songs. But this didn't last long. Shortly after she entered the hospital in 1929, Guthrie followed his nomadic father to Pampa, Texas, as a means of escaping the pain caused by the taking of his mother. His father owned a flop house in the town, living a less lavish life than he did on his 30 acres back home to try and make money to pay back bad real estate dealings. Upon arriving in Pampa and seeing the state of the school, Woody, then 18, decided he would not attend, and instead spent all his days learning more blues on his harmonica, busking for change, and reading at the local library. Guthrie wrote in his autobiography, "Pampa is a Texas oil boom town and wilder than a woodchuck." But it seems this wasn't the lifestyle for him, though I guess it helped him beat the pain of his loss and forget for a while. Guthrie did not stay in Pampa very long. This Dust Bowl town shaped him, even being the place that he would get married to Mary Jennings and father 3 children, but it could never be a place he could die happily. He couldn't stand to be in one place for too long, just as his father, and when dust storms settled into Pampa in the mid-30s, Guthrie got tired of his dry eyes and coughing up black dust and joined the trail of Texans and Okies moving out to California in search for some real employment and a better environment, leaving his wife and 3 kids behind in Pampa for a while. Later in the 30s, Guthrie struck his first fame from his radio show on KFVD, where him and his co-host Maxine Christman would perform live old hillbilly songs over the air, earning enough money all the while to bring his family down to California with him. The radio station itself was owned by a well-known progressive Democrat at the time, Frank W. Burke. Burke gave Guthrie just what he needed: freedom to speak his mind and an audience to speak it to. It was at this time at KFVD that he wrote and performed many of his first protest songs that eventually ended up on his first album, Dust Bowl Ballads, which is one of my personal favorite albums of all time, despite its shitty audio recordings. At the studio, Guthrie had come to meet Ed Robin, a newscaster and self-admitted leftist. Robin was enamored by a song Guthrie wrote about Thomas Mooney, a political activist wrongly convicted in a case that was a rousing controversy of the time. Robin became Guthrie's political mentor, introduced Guthrie to socialists and communists in Southern California, including Will Geer, who then went on to introduce Guthrie to famed writer John Steinbeck. Guthrie would later claim, "The best thing that I did in 1936 was join the Communist Party," something that Robin had pushed him directly to do. Well, maybe not officially, but spiritually. See, Guthrie never actually joined the direct party, but he was closely connected with them and called many of their members friends. He hated putting a label on it and just believed right was right, label or not. And it was this belief that, although him never joining officially, let the other communists trust in him so much that he actually ended up writing a column continuously in the People's World Communist magazine at the time from late 1938 to 1940. With the outbreak of World War II and publicity about the non-aggression pact the Soviet Union had signed with Germany in 1939, the opinions of the KFVD shifted with the wind, and they did not want their staff spinning apologia for the Soviet Union. They promptly ended the show, firing Guthrie and Christman. With the loss to the show and growing fear of the Soviet Union, Guthrie's employment chances disappeared as quickly as they came, and he returned with his family to Pampa, Texas before the end of 1939. Although Mary was happy to return to Texas, when Guthrie was offered by Will Geer to move out and take employment in New York, he accepted immediately.
Land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf.
The Oklahoma Cowboy, a label given to him by people in the New York music scene, was immediately embraced from the moment he set foot in the city. He was still sleeping on Will Geer's couch when he began to record his first real records. It was still living on this couch in an apartment that he couldn't afford that he recorded Dust Bowl ballads for Victor Records in Camden, New Jersey, and also directly on that couch where he had been recorded by Alan Lomax, a folklorist taking field recordings for the Library of Congress at the time. In February of 1940, fed up with the overplaying of God Bless America by Irving Berlin on every single folk station, seeing it as a far too romantic and unrealistic, complacent song, Woody Guthrie decided to adapt Oh My Loving Brother, an old gospel song, ripping its melodies to create the one song that I will mention in this video that I am certain you know, even if unfamiliar with the man himself. This land is your land. Putting directly in the manuscript to the song, to mock God Bless America, all you can sing is what you've actually seen. Worth noting, although written in 1940, low on funds, the song was not actually recorded until 1944. Within the next 2 months after the writing of This Land Is Your Land, Guthrie had moved in with fellow comrade and folk artist Pete Seeger, someone I also plan on making a video on in the future, so look out for that if you like this one. Guthrie had actually met Seeger in March of 1940 while they were both playing a benefit to raise money for disenfranchised farm owners, hosted by John Steinbeck, and Pete fit perfectly in with Woody's lifestyle. They were completely simpatico. In September 1940, Guthrie was invited by the Model Tobacco Company to host Pipe Smoking Time, a radio show for which Guthrie was paid $180 a week, a bountiful pay for the time, and with his new employment, he was finally making enough money to send regular payments back to Mary. Then, eventually, also brought her and the children to New York to live with him, where the family lived briefly in an apartment on Central Park West, having a deep want to be a better father than his own, saying, I have to sit and think real hard of being a dad. Just as soon as they came to New York, they were gone. Guthrie quit after the 7th broadcast, claiming he had begun to feel the show was too restrictive when he was told what he was allowed to sing. This, among other things, had made him extremely disgruntled with New York. Guthrie packed up Mary and his children in a new car and headed back west to California. This didn't last long, though. Taking after the nomadic roots of his father, in May 1941, Guthrie moved to Portland, Oregon, on the promise of a job. Guthrie von Fritsch was directing a documentary about the Bonneville Power Administration's construction of the Grand Coulee Dam on the Columbia River and needed a narrator. Alan Lomax had recommended Guthrie to narrate the film and sing songs on screen, but becoming worried about using such a political figure, they snuffed Guthrie's role. The Department of the Interior hired him for just 1 month, in which he wrote songs about the production of the dam for the documentary soundtrack. From this, Guthrie became infatuated with the Columbia River and the Pacific Northwest as a whole, saying, I couldn't believe it. It's a paradise. Inspiring him creatively, in 1 month, Guthrie wrote 26 songs, including his well-known hit, Grand Coulee Dam. The surviving songs from these times were released as Columbia River Songs in 1941, although the actual film, Columbia, was not completed until 1949. At the conclusion of the month in Oregon and Washington, Guthrie wanted to return to New York. But fed up with constant moving, Mary refused to go and kept the children with her in Oregon or Washington. It's not very clear. Although Guthrie would see Mary again once on tour through Los Angeles with the Almanac Singers, this was the end of their marriage in all actuality. Mary, being a Catholic, refused to actually divorce at first, but did concede and allow a divorce to happen in December of 1943. Formed in 1941, Pete Seeger's Almanac Singers, or AS, which I will be calling them for the remainder of this video, were a folk protest organization that immediately accepted Guthrie upon his return to New York. Together, they lived in a loft in the city where the organization ran hootenannies, which were basically just concerts which they ran every Sunday to get the word out, have fun, and help pay rent on their co-living space. During his time with the AS, he would write protest music he called peace songs, a term that, for all my research, seems to start with him and would later go on to be used by other protest musicians such as Country Joe and Bob Dylan. The AS soon grew out of this loft and founded a co-op in Greenwich Village to be its final home, where they all stayed and wrote together. While many people came in and out of the group, the main people of mention that lived in the co-op and donated most of their time were Woody, Pete Seeger, Millard Lampell, not a musician himself, but a radio show writer that would help them with their protest side of things, and also Lee Hayes, a fellow protest folk musician of the time. In the co-op, they were all equally dished out chores, equal workloads in their own lanes for the movements. They worked hard to make cohabitation work, something that a lot of modern lefties just fail to do when they try to do this. I just think it's pretty funny that they were able to work it out in the 40s, but somehow, almost 100 years later, we can't figure out how to fucking cohabitate with each other without some bullshit infighting. Despite Pete Seeger being the founder, Guthrie's real Oklahoma blue-collar roots made him the poster boy of the movement, a true working man that could give infinite credit to the coastal elites he'd agreed to join. The people view the AS as a real workers' movement because of Guthrie and despite the others. Not to discredit them entirely, but I think they'd admit this themselves. And in fact, a great friend of the group did once, stating, "There was a heart of America personified in Woody. And for the New York left that was primarily Jewish first or second generation American and was desperately trying to be seen as Americanized, I think a figure like Woody was of great importance." The AS was extremely popular. So much so that they toured the country under the name, protesting and hosting their hootenannies in many states. It was one of the most successful projects Woody ever partook in. Soon after, in 1942, Labor for Victory, an NBC weekly segment run as a public service and narrated by the AFL and CIO press chiefs Philip Pearl and Len DeCow, which many of Guthrie's friends, including previously mentioned Matthew Lampell, wrote for, approached Guthrie to sing on the show, as he had already done with the programs such as Answering You and We the People. Guthrie sang on the program a few times between 1943 and 1948, and these recordings are preserved on at least one of his collections of music, which is just a little cool thing I felt worth mentioning. This man has so much music out there to find. And it's not all in the normal places, but if you look deep, you can find so many recordings of him. But this is nothing compared to Guthrie's contributions during World War II. You see, Guthrie desperately wanted to be a USO tour member to support the troops. But when efforts failed because of his time participating in politics at home, he didn't quit and enlisted as a merchant marine, working as a cook and custodian aboard naval vessels during his time. He made several voyages aboard merchant ships, such as the SS William B. Travis and the SS Sea Porpoise. He was with them no matter what, including in convoys during the Battle of the Atlantic, all the while using his guitar to sing songs for the troops, as he wanted to do on those USO tours. His major moment in this time being his time aboard the Sea Porpoise, when it took trips from the United States to England and France for the D-Day invasion. Guthrie was on board when the ship was torpedoed off of Utah Beach by a German submarine on July 5th, 1944, injuring 12 of the crew. Guthrie was unhurt and the ship stayed afloat. The Sea Porpoise returned to England, where she was repaired at Newcastle, and in late July 1944 returned to the United States finally. Guthrie wrote many songs about his time in the Merchant Corps, but was never satisfied with them, and to my knowledge, none were ever actually recorded. Most of the information that we have on Guthrie during his time at sea is from a book called Woody, Cisco and Me, written by Jim Lohe, which I read for this video, and is a super interesting look at Woody from an outsider who knew him best while he was aboard a ship. There's very few books about Woody Guthrie not written directly by him, so it was very cool to read one that was written from an outsider. I feel like it gave us a better perspective on who Woody really was. Finally, out of the Army, Guthrie moved into a home on Coney Island with his new wife, Marjorie Greenblatt, and fathered 4 children. But it quickly became 3, as the Guthrie family curse struck again, and one of his daughters, Kathy, died at the age of 4 in a fire. This marriage is the marriage that brought Woody his continued legacy through the birth of his son, Arlo, who also went on to have a prolific singer-songwriter career. I'm also considering making a video on Arlo, so stay tuned for that. I think he'd be an interesting guy to look into, being someone that was directly related to such a famous folk singer that goes so far under the radar. I mean, there are probably people out there that know Arlo Guthrie and don't even know who Woody is, and I think that's very interesting. It was in this house, though, that despite, or maybe fueled by his tragic loss, Guthrie wrote the majority of his major works, and also took up a great love for painting and drawing. It was also in this home that he would become the mentor of an admirer, Rambling Jack Elliott, a man who was enamored with Guthrie's process and would spend many of his days in the home studying him as he wrote memoirs, songs, and did anything else that came to mind. But all good things have to come to an end. In 1952, Guthrie was diagnosed with Huntington's after severe mental deterioration and bouts with schizophrenia. It is at this time that Marjorie suggested that Guthrie move to California, as it's where he yearned to be, and they later divorced. Upon his return to California, Guthrie called his old friend Will Geer and got permission to stay at a theater ran by him. He lived there for a while, mainly waiting out the spread of anti-communist propaganda in the mid-1950s. It's here where he met his 3rd wife, Annette von Kirk, and had 1 child, Lorena Lynn, who later died in a fiery motor vehicle crash in Southern California. Still having a nomad spirit, he moved again in his worsening health to live in a bus on a friend's land in Florida, this time with his wife and child. It was here where once again his family curse left his arm crippled in a gasoline fire explosion, and he was never able to play guitar again. Depressed and unable to do the one thing he loved most, he did what he loved second and moved another time back to New York, where, fun fact, he stayed in an apartment owned by Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump, and wrote a song about his evil politics and real estate practices entitled Old Man Trump. This is like, we live in a simulation levels of info to me. Maybe I just can't handle coincidences, but I thought this was kinda crazy, and it was not something I was expecting to find when looking into him. Soon after, Guthrie did his 3rd favorite thing and divorced again after his wife couldn't bear to deal with his worsening health. Stress worsening his brain, he was soon admitted to Greystone Park Psychiatric, and then later Brooklyn State Hospital, and finally Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, all the while being cared for by his 2nd wife, Marjorie, who had re-entered his life at this time. Guthrie worsened quicker and quicker, and by 1965 he was unable to speak at all, often only moving his arms and rolling his eyes to communicate. The once great singer and speaker of the people had finally lost his voice for good. Huntington's symptoms include uncharacteristic aggression and emotional volatility. The progression of the disease threw Guthrie into extreme emotional states, causing him to lash out at those nearby and to also destroy a prized and once treasured to him rare book collection Annette had left behind. Guthrie died on October 3rd, 1967, by Marjorie's side. Guthrie's death increased awareness of the disease. Marjorie actually helped found the Committee to Combat Huntington's Disease, which became the Huntington's Disease Society of America. It's worth noting, being cursed with a painful life His 2 daughters that he had had with Mary, Gwendolyn and Sue, both inherited Huntington's disease and died at the age of 41. However, none of Guthrie's 3 surviving children are yet to show any symptoms of Huntington's. Guthrie left behind a family and a legacy. Through his life spreading politics any man should be proud to have, even at a time of deep-rooted, widespread propaganda and hate towards the movement from the state. His death led to tons of research on the disease that ravaged his bloodline. His 2 kids, Arlo and Nora, carried on the mantle of folk musicianship in his honor despite his flaws. I don't know if there is a heaven, but if there is, Lord, keep this one safe. I've been Lotus. Have a fantastic day.